If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The midday heat beat down on the cobblestone streets of Northwood Heights, a working-class district of Portland, Oregon. Despite the blazing sun, the cold wind characteristic of Oregon's largest city cut through the air, reminding residents that even on warm days, the chill always found its way. On Purple Blossom Lane, known for the purple flowering trees that beautified the landscape in the autumn months, the quiet Sunday afternoon was broken by the deep rumble of 4 customized motorcycles. The motorcycles lined up, their engines rumbling like metallic thunder before falling silent. 4 men dismounted, all wearing black leather vests with an emblem on the back, a flaming motorcycle wheel with the words Road Knights. The group was known in the region for their social work, although many still viewed them with suspicion due to their intimidating appearance. Neighbors peered curiously from their windows. Mrs. Zuleika, the woman who sold street tacos on the corner, quickly pulled her granddaughter, who was playing on the sidewalk inside. The atmosphere of tension was palpable. "What is this place, Manuel? Are you sure the address is correct?" asked Jefferson, the tallest of the group, adjusting the red bandana that held his dreadlocks in place. "According to the information I received, it should be on this street." "A complicated situation involving a former employee of Mendonza Events," replied Manuel, leader of the Road Knights, a middle-aged man with arms covered in tattoos and a serene gaze that contrasted with his rugged appearance. It was then that, amidst the tense silence, a child's voice stood out. "Mister, do you want to buy a bicycle?" The 4 men turned simultaneously to find the source of that voice. A girl of approximately 6 years old was watching them. Curly hair tied in uneven pigtails, a simple dress with small patches on the hems, large and expressive brown eyes. In her small hands, she held a cardboard sign on which was written, in childish and misaligned letters, "Bike cycle for sale." Beside her, leaning against a tree, was a pink bicycle with a white basket. Some children's character stickers already faded by time. Manuel approached, crouching down to the child's height. "Hello, little one. What's your name?" "Juliana," she replied in a soft but determined voice. "But everyone calls me Jules." "Nice to meet you, Jules. I'm Manuel." "Is this bicycle really yours?" The girl nodded, pressing the sign against her chest. "And why do you want to sell it?" "It looks like a really cool bike." Jules bit her lower lip, hesitant. Her eyes welled up, but she maintained a composure that no 6-year-old should ever need to maintain. "My mom hasn't eaten for 2 days. She's very weak and can't work. The money from the bike is to buy food." The simplicity and urgency of those words silenced the 4 men. It was Roderick, the youngest of the group, who broke the silence. "And where is your mom now, Jules?" The girl pointed to a small, unplastered brick house. In the yard, under the shade of a mango tree, a woman sat on a plastic chair. Even from a distance, her fragility was noticeable. Wrapped in a thin blanket, despite the heat, she seemed absent, as if all her energy was concentrated solely on breathing. "That's my mum, Mrs. Constance. She used to work making food for parties, but the rich man fired her. Then she got sick and couldn't work anymore. We've already sold almost everything from home." Manuel exchanged glances with his companions. They didn't need words to communicate what they felt. Jefferson went to his motorcycle and returned with a thermal bag where they kept water and snacks for the trip. Delson, the 4th member of the group, was already on his cell phone, talking quickly with someone. "Jules," Manuel said gently, "your bicycle is very special. I don't think we should buy it." The girl's face fell in disappointment. "But," he continued, taking his wallet from his pocket, "we would like to help you and your mom in another way." Manuel handed some bills to the child, whose eyes widened at the sight of the amount. This is all for me." "Yes, it's for you to buy food and medicine for your mom. And we want you to keep your bicycle." Jules looked at the money, at the bicycle, and back at Manuel, confused by that unexpected generosity. "Why? You don't even know us." Manuel smiled, revealing a gentle expression that few had the privilege of seeing behind his grizzled beard and intimidating appearance. "Because sometimes, little one, people need to help each other. That's what someone did for me one day when I needed it." At that moment, Delson returned to the group. "I spoke with Nadine from the community center. She's sending some food baskets, and we'll stop by with Dr. Paul to see Mrs. Constance today." Jules impulsively hugged Manuel's leg, the only gesture of gratitude her small stature allowed. He stroked her curly hair, visibly moved. Jefferson approached with the thermal bag. "There are sandwiches, fruits, and water here. Take it to your mum, little one." The girl took the bag, which seemed enormous in her thin arms, and ran towards her mother. The four men watched as Constance looked up, confused to see her daughter arriving with food and accompanied by 4 motorcyclists. Manuel gave a respectful nod in her direction. "We need to talk to her," he said to his companions, "to know exactly what happened." "Do you think it's the Mendoza events case?" asked Roderick. "All indications point to it. If so, then we've found another victim of Richard Mendoza." The 4 men walked towards the house, determined to hear Constance's story. What none of them imagined was that this casual encounter, with a girl selling her bicycle, would trigger a series of events that would change not only the lives of Jules and her mother, but also many other families in Portland. Meanwhile, miles away, in the luxurious West Hills neighborhood, Richard Mendoza savored his Sunday brunch on the balcony of his penthouse, completely oblivious to the fact that soon his perfectly organized world would be turned upside down by 4 motorcyclists and a cardboard sign. Constance Santos watched the 4 men approaching with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Sitting in her plastic chair, she tried to straighten up, a visible effort that betrayed her weakness. Jules, still holding the thermal bag, positioned herself protectively beside her mother. "Mom, these men gave me money to buy food for us, and they didn't even want to take my bicycle." Constance looked at the money in her daughter's hand, and then at the 4 men, unable to hide her astonishment. "Please accept our help, ma'am," Manuel said respectfully. "I'm Manuel of the Road Knights, and these are my friends, Jefferson, Roderick, and Delson. We help people across the United States," Roderick added. "Today we're in Portland for a specific matter, but it seems fate brought us here for a greater reason." Constance hesitated for a moment, but the sincerity in the men's eyes and Jules's genuine smile convinced her. With a weak gesture, she indicated the plastic chairs in the yard. "I'm sorry I can't offer anything. Not even coffee." "Don't worry about that, Mrs. Constance," Delson said as he sat down. "In fact, a friend of ours from the community center is coming to bring some food baskets and a doctor to see you." A silent tear rolled down the woman's face, which she quickly wiped away. "Jules said you worked at Mendoza events." Manuel went straight to the point. "Is that where it happened?" Constance nodded, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. "I worked there for almost 8 years. I started as a kitchen assistant and became head of catering. We organized events for Portland's wealthiest people." She took a deep breath before continuing. "In January, my husband, Anthony, had an accident at the construction site where he worked. Nothing serious, thank God, but he needed to rest for a few weeks. Jules, who had opened one of the sandwiches, offered it to her mother, who ate slowly, as if she hadn't tasted food in a long time. Richard Mendoza, the owner of the company, started saying he needed to cut costs. He fired several long-time employees to hire temporary workers, paying them less. When it was my turn, I begged to stay. I explained that my husband was out of work, that we had Jules, the bills. I asked to at least stay until I found another job." Constance paused, the memory still painful. "He said I was replaceable, that there were dozens of cooks waiting for a vacancy. He offered a severance much less than my rights, said I could accept it, or he would find a way to fire me for cause." She wiped away another tear. "I accepted out of fear. The money lasted a few months, but Anthony couldn't find a steady job, only odd jobs in construction." "And where is your husband now?" asked Jefferson. "He got a job in Salem on a big construction project. He's living in the construction company's lodging and sends what he can, but the money barely covers the rent." Jules, who was playing with one of the loose stickers on her bicycle, interrupted. "Daddy called yesterday. He said he'd send money on Friday." Constance smiled sadly. "Last week I caught a bad virus. I couldn't go to the job interviews I had scheduled. Then came the weakness. I haven't been eating properly to leave the little we have for Jules." Manuel exchanged meaningful glances with his companions. Constance's story was another chapter in the book of injustices they had been collecting about Richard Mendoza. "Mrs. Constance," Manuel began cautiously, "we are in Portland because we received several complaints similar to your situation. Employees unjustly fired from Mendonza events, people falling ill due to lack of assistance, families in need. At the same time, Richard Mendonza appears on magazine covers as Entrepreneur of the Year and Philanthropist. Roderick, the youngest, couldn't contain his indignation. He fires people who worked for the company for years and then donates a pittance to social projects just to look good in the media. It's pure hypocrisy. Unfortunately, that's the reality for many business owners, Delson sighed. They pretend social responsibility while exploiting their own employees. The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of a car parking. A white van with the logo of the Good Samaritan Community Center stopped in front of the house. A robust, middle-aged woman with grey hair pulled back in a bun descended, accompanied by an older gentleman in a white lab coat. Nadine and Dr. Paul, Delson explained to Constance. My sister coordinates the community center, and the doctor volunteers there. Nadine greeted everyone with the familiarity of someone who has known the neighborhood's problems for years. She carried 2 food baskets and a bag of medicines. Dr. Paul immediately began to examine Constance. Dehydration and mild malnutrition, he diagnosed after a few minutes. Nothing that good food and rest won't solve. I'll leave vitamins and a nutritional supplement. Nadine quickly organized the groceries in the small kitchen while explaining the community center's assistance program to Constance. We'll include you in the registry of assisted families. We offer bi-weekly food baskets and have a job bank. You can stop by tomorrow to talk about opportunities. Jules watched everything with wide eyes, hugging her bicycle as if she still feared losing it. Manuel crouched beside her. See? Things are going to get better now. The girl nodded, but her gaze revealed a wisdom beyond her years. Are there more people like my mum that the rich man fired? The question, in its childlike simplicity, carried the weight of a systemic injustice that the road knights knew all too well. Yes, Jules, there are many people. That's why we're here. And will you help everyone? Manuel smiled, touched by the child's concern for others beyond herself. We'll try. Sometimes to help many people at once, we need to make someone important understand that their actions have consequences. While Dr. Paul continued to care for Constance and Nadine organized the kitchen, the 4 motorcyclists gathered in a corner of the yard to talk. She's the 5th former employee we've found in the same situation, Jefferson noted. All with similar stories. The pattern is clear, Delson agreed. Mendonza fires long-term employees, especially those with families depending on them, to hire temporary workers for lower wages. Meanwhile, Roderick added, he appears in the newspaper donating to charities. Just last week I saw an article about him sponsoring a shelter for abandoned children. Manuel listened in silence, his gaze alternating between the fragile Constance and the determined Jules, who was already helping Nadine in the kitchen. It's time for us to pay a visit to the illustrious Richard Mendonza, he finally decided. Today is Sunday, family day for him. He'll be in his penthouse in West Hills, probably planning his next philanthropic action. The 4 men exchanged determined glances. It was time to confront the businessman with the reality he so conveniently ignored. On the other side of the city, unaware that his Sunday afternoon would be disturbed, Richard Mendonza calmly sipped his gourmet coffee while flipping through the Sunday edition of the newspaper. A photo of him illustrated the social column alongside celebrities at a charity event. The article's headline proclaimed, Businessman Richard Mendonza donates $100,000 to social project. What the businessman didn't know was that, in a few minutes, he would be face to face with the real consequences of his business decisions, and that the confrontation would come in the form of 4 motorcyclists and the story of a girl who almost sold her bicycle to feed the mother he had fired. The Willamette Towers was one of the most imposing buildings in the West Hills neighborhood. With its mirrored facade reflecting the Portland sky, the 30 floors symbolized the economic power concentrated in that privileged part of Oregon's largest city. The building's doorman, Mr. Gervais, watched with suspicion as the 4 motorcycles stopped at the garage entrance. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, strategically positioning himself to block access. Manuel turned off his Harley-Davidson's engine and removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by time and experience. His deep brown eyes conveyed unwavering determination. "We're here to speak with Mr. Richard Mendonza." Penthouse 301. The doorman hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the four men in black vests. Although they weren't being aggressive, their presence alone was intimidating. Mr. Mendonça does not receive visitors without prior appointment, especially on Sundays. Manuel smiled, a smile devoid of humor. I'm sure he'll want to receive us. Tell him it's the road nights, and that we have important information about Mrs. Constance Santos's case. Reluctantly, the doorman picked up the intercom. After a brief conversation, seemingly surprised, he indicated the service elevator. Mr. Mendonça will receive you. Fifth elevator, direct to the penthouse. The four men exchanged meaningful glances. It was unusual for someone like Richard Mendonça to agree so easily to receive unexpected visitors, especially from people like them. In the elevator, Roderick, the youngest of the group at 28 years old, seemed restless. Do you think he knows who we are? Delson, a robust black man with a shaved head, adjusted his vest where Road Knight's Sowers of Justice was emblazoned. If he doesn't know, he'll find out soon. Jefferson, the tallest of the group, with his long dreadlocks held by a red bandana, remained silent, a calm and contemplative presence. Unlike the others, he hadn't joined the movement by chance or personal choice. He had been rescued by it. As the elevator ascended, Jefferson recalled his own encounter with the Road Knights. 5 years earlier, he had been unjustly imprisoned, accused of a robbery he hadn't committed. Without money for a good lawyer, and with a justice system prejudiced against young black men from working-class neighborhoods, he spent 8 months detained until his case caught the attention of Manuel, who at the time worked as a social worker before retiring and dedicating himself entirely to the movement. Manuel mobilized the group to gather evidence of his innocence and a competent lawyer. When he was finally released, Jefferson discovered that he had lost not only 8 months of his life, but also his job, his apartment, and the trust of many friends. It was Manuel who took him in, offering not only temporary shelter, but also a purpose, and so the former law student became a Road Knight, dedicating his life to preventing other injustices like the one he had suffered from happening. The sound of the elevator reaching the penthouse brought Jefferson back to the present. The doors opened directly into a private hall decorated with contemporary artwork and an immense crystal chandelier. Richard Mendonça awaited them, impeccably dressed in a casual light linen suit, even though it was Sunday. Tall, with a physique maintained by expensive personal trainer sessions, perfectly trimmed grey hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Beside him, a corpulent man who clearly served as a personal security guard watched the visitors with suspicion. "Gentlemen," Richard greeted with false cordiality, "I must admit I'm curious. For it's not every day I receive a visit from the famous Road Knights." Manuel stepped forward, his calm demeanor contrasting with the tension in the air. "So you know our work." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Richard made a dismissive gesture with his hand, indicating the armchairs in the living room. "Please make yourselves comfortable, and yes, I know your work. That story in Montana, with the plant that was contaminating the river. Impressive how you managed to mobilize public opinion." His calculated smile widened. "I admire organizations that fight for social causes. In fact, my company is a major sponsor of community projects." The businessman made a signal and a maid appeared discreetly. "Bring coffee for our guests." "Marilda." The four men remained standing, declining the invitation to sit. "We didn't come for a social coffee," Manuel said, his voice calm but firm. "We came to talk about Constance Santos." The name seemed to awaken no immediate recognition in Richard. He frowned as if trying to remember. "Santos? Her former employee, I presume?" "Exactly," Delson confirmed. "Head of catering in your company for 8 years. Fired a few months ago when her husband had an accident, and she asked not to be dismissed." Richard shrugged. "Indifferent. I'm sorry, but I don't personally get involved in human resources decisions for operational positions. We have a department that handles that according to corporate policies." "Interesting," Jefferson commented, his tone polite but cutting. "Because according to her, it was you personally who called her in, who said she was replaceable, and who threatened her with termination for cause if she didn't accept a severance package below the correct value." A tense silence filled the room. Richard's expression hardened slightly, but he maintained his composure. Do you believe the word of a former employee who is probably resentful for having been fired? My company strictly follows labor laws. It was Roderick's turn to speak, his youth showing in his barely contained indignation. So it's a coincidence that in the last 6 months, at least 12 employees with more than 5 years at the company have been fired and replaced by temporary workers earning half the salary. Richard laughed, a cold and calculated sound. You really did your homework, but that's called corporate restructuring, my dears. It's perfectly legal and a common practice in the market. Times are tough for everyone. Manuel, who until then had been observing the businessman carefully, took a folded paper from his vest pocket. It was the cardboard sign Jules had made with the words, "Bicycle for sale," written in childish handwriting. Do you recognize this? He asked, extending the sign to Richard. The businessman took the paper, confused. A bicycle for sale sign? What does this have to do with anything? It was written by Jules, Constance Santos's daughter. She's 6 years old, and today she was trying to sell her bicycle, her most precious possession, to buy food for her mother, who hasn't eaten for 2 days. Manuel paused, observing Richard's reaction. This is the real consequence of your corporate restructuring, Mr. Mendonza. The impact of the words was visible. For a brief moment, something seemed to waver behind the businessman's impeccable facade. Perhaps surprise, perhaps guilt. But he quickly regained his composure. That's regrettable, truly. But I cannot be held responsible for what happens in the personal lives of former employees after they leave the company. I'm sure there are government social programs for such cases. The maid returned with a coffee tray, but Richard gestured for her to leave, realizing the conversation had taken a different turn. Delson stepped forward, his deep voice carrying the weight of years dealing with similar injustices. Here's what we know. Mr. Mendonza, your company profited $15 million more in the last semester, after firing long-term employees and hiring temporary ones. In the same period, you donated $100,000 to social projects and spent $300,000 on advertising to publicize those donations. Meanwhile, Jefferson continued, families like Constance's are going hungry. Children like Jules are selling their toys to buy food. And you appear in social columns as a benefactor. Hypocrisy has a price, Mr. Mendonza, Roderick concluded, and it's time to settle that bill. Richard looked at the security guard who stepped forward, but Manuel raised his hand in a pacifying gesture. We didn't come here for threats or physical confrontations. We are men of peace above all. So what exactly do you want? Richard asked, his voice now stripped of false cordiality. Money, is that it? How much does it cost for you to disappear? Manuel smiled, a sad smile that carried the compassion of someone who has seen too much pain in the world. We don't want your money, Mr. Mendonza. We want your conscience. We want you to look at what your business decisions cause in real life. He placed a folder on the coffee table. Here are the stories of 12 of your former employees, including Constance. Their faces, their names, their daily struggles after being fired by your company. Read them, reflect, and then decide what kind of legacy you want to leave in this world. The businessman stared at the folder as if it was something dangerous. And if I refuse? The 4 men exchanged glances. It was Jefferson, with his unfinished legal education, who responded, Then we will make these stories public. Every newspaper, every TV station, every digital influencer will know how the philanthropist Richard Mendonza truly treats his employees. And believe us, we have enough evidence for your image never to recover. A heavy silence filled the room. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the luxurious apartment with orange hues that contrasted with the coldness of the conversation. Finally, Richard picked up the folder, his face an indecipherable mask. I'll read it. I promise nothing more than that. Manuel nodded, satisfied with that small step. That's all we ask. Her chance for the truth to be heard. The 4 men headed for the elevator, leaving behind a visibly disturbed Richard Mendonza. The folder closed in his hands like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. Richard Mendonza remained motionless for several minutes after the road knights left, his eyes fixed on the folder on the coffee table, as if it might contain some kind of trap. Finally, he dismissed the security guard with an irritated gesture. You can go. Adam, I need to be alone. When he found himself completely alone in the spacious apartment, Richard poured himself a generous dose of whiskey and walked to the balcony. From the height of his penthouse, he contemplated the city sprawling below. Lights began to dot the landscape as dusk advanced. From there, Portland looked like a perfect model, with its green parks and orderly avenues. A city where everything worked, where beauty and organization hid the social disparities he preferred to ignore. He returned to the living room and finally opened the folder. The first page contained a photo of Constance Santos. Not her company ID photo, where she appeared neat and smiling, but a recent image showing her worn face, sunken eyes, the expression of someone carrying too heavy a burden. Beside it, a brief professional biography detailed her 8 years at Mendonza Events, her promotions, the compliments from satisfied clients about her work. Dismissed in January 2024, the document read. Official reason, company restructuring. Real reason, salary considered too high for the position. Replaced by 2 temporary assistants with a combined salary lower than hers. The following pages presented similar cases. Sebastian Oliver, 52, a driver, dismissed after 10 years due to restructuring a month before his daughter started college. Marianne Lopez, 47, an event coordinator, replaced by a recent graduate earning 1/3 of her salary. Gilbert Fry, 55, head of maintenance, laid off when he needed to take time off to care for his wife during cancer treatment. Each story was accompanied by photos, testimonials, and details about how their lives had been affected by the dismissal. Richard recognized some faces, employees he himself had greeted in the company corridors, people whose names he had never bothered to memorize, but who had dedicated years of their lives to the growth of his business. The last page of the folder contained a photo of Jules, Constance's daughter, holding the bicycle for sale sign. Her large brown eyes stared at the camera with a mixture of innocence and premature determination. Richard closed the folder uneasy. He wasn't an insensitive man, or at least he didn't consider himself one. He made substantial donations to charities, sponsored charitable events, appeared in social responsibility campaigns. But he had always maintained a safe distance between his philanthropic actions and his business decisions, as if they belonged to separate universes. He walked to a bookshelf where he kept photographs and awards. One in particular caught his attention, himself at 10 years old next to his mother, Mrs. Eliza. The resemblance between that photo and Jules's image was unsettling. The same determined expression, the same gaze that seemed too serious for a child. Richard picked up the photograph, recalling his own childhood in a modest neighborhood of Portland. His father had abandoned the family when he was 5, leaving his mother to raise 2 small children alone. Mrs. Eliza worked as a seamstress, often working double shifts to ensure the family's livelihood. There was an episode, almost forgotten in the folds of time, that the motorcyclist's visit had unearthed. Richard, at 10 years old, trying to sell his collection of toy cars to help his mother pay the overdue rent. The shame, the fear, the childish despair, feelings he had buried as he built his business empire, as if that vulnerable boy were another person, unrelated to the successful businessman he had become. The phone rang, interrupting his reflections. It was Maurice Alves, his financial director and right-hand man at the company. Richard, I'm finalizing the numbers for tomorrow's meeting. We achieved an 18% increase in profit margin with the recent structural changes. The board will be impressed. Richard hesitated, looking at the folder on the table. Maurice, at what cost did we achieve this increase? What do you mean? The voice on the other end sounded confused. I mean, how many people were affected by our decisions? How many families? An uncomfortable silence followed the question. Richard, are you all right? It's not like you to question positive results. Was it that visit the doorman called me about? Who were they? No one important, Richard lied. I'm just tired. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow? After hanging up, he returned to the balcony. The sky was now completely dark, dotted with stars that the city's light pollution could not completely obscure. On the horizon, the lights of the peripheral neighborhoods twinkled, including Northwood Heights, where Constance and Jules probably were at that moment. His mind wandered to the early years of Mendonza Events. He had started small, with 3 employees in a modest commercial office. He worked as hard as his employees, knew every client by name, New details about the families of those who worked with him. At what point had he lost that connection? When had the numbers in financial reports become more important than the people who generated them? You can't buy forgiveness, but you can choose to do the right thing. Manuel's words echoed in his mind. Richard had always believed that his donations and philanthropic work were ways of doing the right thing. But now, confronted with the direct consequences of his business decisions, he questioned whether his philanthropy was merely a way to appease his own conscience. The sound of the elevator door caught his attention. His wife Helen was returning from a spa weekend with friends. Elegant as always, wearing a light linen ensemble and discreet jewelry, she placed her shopping bags in the hall and approached to kiss him. "You seem worried," she commented, knowing well the nuances of her husband's expression after 20 years of marriage. Richard did not answer immediately. Helen was his partner in every sense. She had helped build the company, stood by him at social events, supported his philanthropic initiatives. But they had never truly discussed the darker aspects of how they maintained their lifestyle. "We had visitors today," he finally said. "4 men called the Road Knights." Helen frowned. "That group of motorcyclists who champion social causes. What did they want with you?" Richard indicated the folder on the table. "They came to show me the consequences of our latest business decisions. Layoffs, replacements, cost-cutting, things we considered just numbers on spreadsheets." Helen sat beside him, intrigued. She opened the folder and examined its contents in silence. Upon reaching Jules's photo with the sign, her eyes filled with tears. "My God, Richard, it's horrible." "It's the reality we created," he admitted, his voice choked. "While we are here in this apartment, people who worked for years for our company are going hungry. Children are selling their toys to buy food." Helen closed the folder, visibly disturbed. "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air for several seconds. Richard again contemplated the city below, the lights of the rich neighborhoods and the poor neighborhoods, all mixed in the darkness of the night. "I'm going to do the only thing possible," he finally replied. "I'm going to fix what I broke." That night, while Helen slept, Richard remained in his office, working frantically. He made calls, sent emails, reviewed spreadsheets and corporate policies. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, as if he were rediscovering the purpose that had motivated him to build his company. In Northwood Heights, Constance finally managed to sleep peacefully after weeks of insomnia caused by worry. With a satisfied stomach and the certainty that she had food for the next few days, she allowed herself a restful sleep. Beside her, Jules slept hugging her pink bicycle, as if she feared someone might take it during the night. Elsewhere in the city, the 4 Road Knights stayed in a small inn. They had done what they could, planted the seed of conscience in Richard Mendonça. Now only time would tell if it would germinate. "Do you think he'll do something?" Roderick asked Manuel as they had coffee before retiring. The older motorcyclist contemplated his cup for a moment, pondering. "I believe so. I saw something in his eyes when I showed him Jules' sign. A spark of recognition, as if he saw himself in that child." "What if he does nothing?" Delson insisted. "What if he ignores all this?" Manuel shrugged. "Then we will keep our promise. We will make the stories public. But I prefer to believe it won't be necessary. Sometimes people just need a mirror to see what they have become. What none of them imagined was that, at that exact moment, Richard Mendonça was making decisions that would change not only his life and that of his former employees, but would establish a new paradigm for the relationship between companies and workers in Portland. A silent yet profound transformation was about to begin. The Mendonça Events Board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but Richard arrived at 7:30 a.m. He wanted time to prepare his presentation and, more importantly, to strengthen his resolve. He knew that what he planned to propose would meet resistance, perhaps even indignation, but he was determined. The meeting room on the 15th floor of the company's headquarters was still empty. Richard contemplated the long, polished mahogany table, the 12 leather chairs arranged around it, the board with the corporate slogan he himself had created years ago, "Excellence at any cost." Those words now sounded distorted, almost cruel to him. At what cost exactly had his company achieved excellence? At the cost of people like Constance Santos, whose 8 years of dedication had been rewarded with dismissal when she most needed stability. At precisely 9 a.m., the board members began to arrive. Shareholders, directors, and advisors, men and women in impeccable suits, carrying tablets and folders with financial reports. Among them, Maurice Alves, the financial director, who still seemed worried after the strange phone conversation the previous night. "Everyone ready to celebrate the excellent quarterly numbers?" asked Claudia Bergman, the marketing director, as she poured herself coffee. Richard did not answer. Instead, he waited for everyone to be seated before starting the projection. Not the usual results presentation, but something completely different. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm despite his nervousness. "Before we discuss numbers and projects, I'd like to talk about people." The first slide showed a photo of Constance Santos and her daughter Jules. The image captured the moment the girl held the bicycle for sale sign, while her mother, too weak to stand, watched from under a tree. "This is Constance Santos, who worked at our company for 8 years as head of catering. And this is her daughter Juliana, 6 years old." A confused silence dominated the room. This was not the expected agenda for the meeting. "Yesterday," Richard continued, "this child was trying to sell her bicycle, her most precious possession, to buy food for her mother, who hasn't eaten for 2 days. Glances crossed around the table. Some showed discomfort, others impatience, few showed genuine interest. "And why is this relevant to our meeting?" asked Theodore Meadows, one of the most influential shareholders. "It's a sad story, of course, but what's the connection to Mendonça events?" Richard took a deep breath. "The connection, Theodore, is that we are directly responsible for this situation. Constance was dismissed in January as part of our human resources optimization program. In the same month, her husband had an accident and had to stop working." He moved to the next slide, showing more faces, former employees whose dismissal had been approved in that very meeting room. "At the last board meeting, we celebrated an 18% increase in profit margin. What we didn't discuss was the human cost of these decisions. Dozens of destabilized families, people with decades of dedication to the company, replaced by poorly paid temporary workers." Maurice shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. "Richard, I understand your concern, but this is business. We are a company, not a charity. We have responsibilities to our shareholders." "And to our employees?" Richard retorted. "And to the community where we operate. We have responsibilities to them too." Claudia Bergman, always practical, intervened. "Richard, if you're concerned about this former employee's situation, we can make a donation to help her. It would even make a good story for our social responsibility campaign this semester." The comment, though well-intentioned, crystallized exactly the problem Richard was beginning to see: the dissociation between corporate actions and their real impacts, the transformation of personal tragedies into marketing opportunities. "It's not just about one former employee, Claudia. It's about a pattern of corporate behavior that we've normalized. We lay off people when they most need stability, replace experienced employees with poorly paid temporary workers, cut benefits while increasing executive bonuses." Richard projected a new slide, a graph, comparing the company's profit growth over the past 5 years with the reduction in permanent staff and the increase in temporary hires. "We became exactly the kind of company I swore I would never build when I started." A heavy silence fell over the room. For many there, it was the first time they had seen Richard Mendonça, known for his business pragmatism, speak with such passion about social issues. Theodore Meadows, the shareholder, was the first to break the silence. "What exactly are you proposing, Richard? That we reverse all optimization measures? That we rehire laid-off employees? That's impractical from a financial standpoint." Richard was prepared for that question. "What I propose is a strategic redirection. Not a complete reversal, but a new balance." He projected a series of slides detailing his plan. "First, a rehire program for former employees who were laid off in the last 6 months and have not yet found new positions. Second, a re-evaluation of our temporary worker salary policy, ensuring fair compensation and the possibility of permanent employment. Third, the creation of an emergency assistance fund for employees in vulnerable situations." Eyebrows rose around the table. These were not revolutionary proposals, but they represented a significant shift in the company's operational philosophy. And where will the money come from to implement these changes? Asked Maurice, the financial director, already calculating the impact on results. Richard smiled, a genuine expression, different from the calculated smile he usually displayed in corporate meetings, from the same place we took to pay the executive bonuses we approved last month. I am proposing a 30% reduction in variable compensation for the board, starting with my own. He paused, observing the reactions. And yes, that includes all of us in this room. A murmur of protests immediately arose. Richard raised his hand, asking for silence. I am also willing to invest $2 million of my personal capital to ensure that these changes do not significantly affect our short-term results. This silenced the protests, at least temporarily. $2 million was a considerable sum, even by the wealth standards of that group. Over the next 2 hours, the meeting turned into an intense debate. There was resistance, of course, especially regarding the reduction of bonuses. But as Richard presented numbers, projections, and case studies of companies that had successfully adopted similar models, the objections gradually diminished. What I am proposing, he concluded, is not only ethically correct, but strategically intelligent. Employees who feel valued and secure produce more and better. Turnover decreases, reducing training costs. Our reputation in the market improves, attracting talent and clients who value social responsibility. In the end, after intense negotiations and adjustments to the original plan, the vote resulted in approval by a narrow majority, 7 votes in favor, 5 against. The reconstruction project, as Richard named it, would be implemented starting that very week. When the meeting ended, around 2 p.m., Richard was exhausted, but satisfied. It was only the first step of a long journey, but he felt he was finally on the right path. Maurice approached him when the others had already left. I never thought I'd see the day when Richard Mendonça would give up profits for social issues, he commented, a mixture of disbelief and respect in his voice. What happened yesterday to cause this change? Richard reflected for a moment, remembering the visit of the Road Knights, Jules's sign, the photo on his shelf showing himself at 10 years old, trying to sell toys to help his mother. Let's just say someone showed me a mirror where I could clearly see what we had become, he replied simply. And I didn't like the image I saw. Meanwhile, in Northwood Heights, Constance received an unexpected visit. Nadine from the community center arrived accompanied by a middle-aged woman, elegantly but discreetly dressed, who introduced herself as Helen Mendonça. Richard Mendonça's wife? Constance asked, confused. Helen nodded, clearly nervous to be there. My husband told me about your situation, about the motorcyclist's visit, about your daughter trying to sell her bicycle. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I came personally to say that the company made a mistake in dismissing you that way, and we want to fix it. Constance watched the visitor with suspicion. After months of hardship, she had learned not to set expectations. What exactly does that mean? Helen handed her an envelope. It's an invitation to come to the company tomorrow. Richard wants to offer you your job back, with all benefits and compensation for the period you were unemployed. Jules, who was playing in the small yard, approached curiously upon hearing the conversation. Mommy will go back to working at parties? Helen smiled at the girl, noticing the resemblance to the photo she had seen in the folder. Yes, if she wants to, and you won't have to sell your bicycle anymore. Constance's suspicion was gradually replaced by relief, and then by something she hadn't felt in months, hope. Why this sudden change? She asked. Helen reflected for a moment. Let's just say my husband finally saw beyond the numbers on the spreadsheets. He saw people. You, your daughter, everyone else who was affected by the company's decisions. That same afternoon, other former employees of Mendonça Events received similar calls. Sebastian Oliver, who now worked as a rideshare driver for 14 hours a day to pay for his daughter's college. Marianne Lopez, who had moved into her sister's house after being unable to afford rent. Gilbert Fry, who sold savory pastries made by his wife at an improvised stand near the hospital, where she was undergoing treatment. For each of them, the message was the same. The company recognized its error and offered a second chance, not as a favor, but as a right. The Road Knights observed these developments from a distance. They had remained in Portland to monitor the situation, staying at the small inn. It was Roderick who saw the news first. On a local portal, businessman Richard Mendonça announces rehire. Program and Employee Assistance Fund. Initiative includes voluntary 30%. Reduction in executive bonuses. Looks like our friend Richard took the conversation seriously, Delson commented, reading the article over his companion's shoulder. Manuel smiled, satisfied but not surprised. We planted the seed. The rest was up to him. Do you think it will last? Asked Jefferson, always the most cautious of the group. Or is it just a marketing stunt that will be forgotten when the dust settles? Manuel reflected on the question, recalling the moment he saw something change in Richard Mendonça's eyes. Not just guilt or fear of public exposure, but a genuine recognition. I believe it's real, he finally answered. When someone reconnects with their own humanity, the change tends to be permanent. What none of them knew was that, at that exact moment, Richard Mendonça was looking at a photo of his mother on his desk, next to a framed copy of Jules's sign, two images separated by decades, but united by the same struggle, the same love, the same courage, a constant reminder of the path he had almost forgotten. 3 months had passed since the transformation at Mendonça events. The Portland autumn painted the trees in shades of red and gold, announcing the approach of the city's harsh winter. In the company's newly renovated cafeteria, Constance Santos guided a team of 6 people in preparing lunch to be served to employees. Be careful with the seasoning. Marcia, she gently instructed a young apprentice, remember that we are cooking for many people with different tastes. As part of the reconstruction project, Constance had not only been rehired, but promoted to coordinator of the new corporate food program, an initiative that guaranteed healthy and free meals for all employees, regardless of position. In addition, the program included professional training for young people from working-class neighborhoods interested in gastronomy. The cafeteria door opened, and Richard Mendonça entered, accompanied by a group of business leaders visiting the company. And here we have our cafeteria, coordinated by the talented Constance Santos, Richard presented, with genuine pride in his voice. This space well represents the new philosophy of Mendonça events, taking care of the people who take care of our clients. Constance smiled, still getting used to this new Richard, a more human, more accessible man, who made a point of having lunch in the cafeteria with other employees at least twice a week. Constance's stroganoff is legendary in the company, Richard continued to the visitors. I suggest you try it. After the group moved away to continue the tour, Constance checked the clock. It was almost 2 p.m., time for Jules to leave school. Since she returned to work, the girl participated in the after-school program that operated in the building itself, another novelty implemented in recent months, which allowed employees with young children to balance work and family. The transformation in Constance's life was just one example of the broader changes that had occurred since that fateful Sunday. Sebastian Oliver, the former driver, now coordinated the company's vehicle fleet. Marianne Lopez had returned as events manager, with revised salary and benefits. Gilbert Fry not only returned to head of maintenance, but also received company support for his wife's treatment, who was fortunately responding well to chemotherapy. When Constance entered the recreational room after work, she found Jules building a complicated structure with building blocks, surrounded by other children. The girl looked up and smiled when she saw her mother. Look, Mom, we're making the company building. Constance observed the colorful construction, impressed by the details her daughter had managed to reproduce, including the new facade with the updated slogan, Excellence with Humanity. It's looking beautiful, honey. Shall we go? Dad must be getting home. It was another positive change. With the financial situation stabilized and the new family support program, Anthony had managed to transfer to a construction project in Portland, reuniting the family. In the parking lot, a surprise awaited mother and daughter. 4 motorcycles were lined up near the exit, and their owners were talking with Richard Mendonça. Manuel, exclaimed Jules, running towards the leader of the road knights. The motorcyclist crouched to receive the girl's enthusiastic hug. How are you, little cyclist? Still have your bike? Yes, I do. And now my dad is teaching me to ride without the training wheels. Constance approached, moved to see the men who had changed the course of her life 3 months earlier. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said, hugging each of them. "I thought you were already far away helping other people." Jefferson smiled, adjusting his red bandana. "We were down south resolving a situation in Bellingham. On our way back to Seattle, we decided to stop by Portland to see how things were. And by the looks of it," Delson added, looking around the parking lot, where several employees were leaving animatedly after a day's work, "things are very good." Richard, who observed the scene with a mixture of gratitude and humility, extended his hand to Manuel. "You arrived at a good time. We are launching the New Paths Foundation today." "Foundation?" Roderick asked, intrigued. Richard nodded, handing them folders with the Foundation's logo, a stylized wheel with spokes that transformed into paths. "A project to expand what we started here at Mendonza Events. We want to encourage other companies to adopt more humane and sustainable practices. We started with 10 partner corporations in Portland, but we already have interested parties in Seattle and Los Angeles." Manuel examined the material, genuinely impressed. "This goes far beyond what we expected when we came here that Sunday." Richard smiled, looking at Jules, who was now showing Roderick a drawing she had made. "Let's just say you reminded me of something important I had forgotten." He paused thoughtfully. "In fact, there's something I never told you, something that happened when I was a child." The group moved a little away, seeking privacy near the motorcycles, while Jules remained entertained with the after-school program educator. "When I was 10 years old," Richard began, "my mother raised me and my brother alone. My father had abandoned us and she worked as a seamstress, often getting sick from overwork. There was a particularly difficult month when she caught severe pneumonia. We couldn't pay the rent and were at risk of eviction." The 4 motorcyclists listened in silence, beginning to understand where the story was heading. "I had a collection of toy cars. It was my most precious treasure. I decided to sell them to help with the rent. I made a sign very similar to what Jules made for her bicycle and went to the park near home." Richard took a deep breath, emotion visible on his usually impassive face. "A group of older guys passed by on motorcycles. I thought they would mock me, maybe even threaten me. But no. They stopped, talked to me, listened to my story. And then one of them bought the entire collection for a price much higher than it was worth, but insisted that I keep the cars." Manuel exchanged meaningful glances with his companions. The circle was closing in a way none of them could have predicted. "They didn't stop there," Richard continued. "The next day my mother received a visit from the neighborhood social worker. Someone had made an anonymous donation that would cover our rent for 6 months and pay for adequate medical treatment for her." "You never knew who those guys were?" Jefferson asked. Richard shook his head. "I couldn't track them down. But that day changed my life. I promised myself that one day I would be like them, someone with power and resources to help others. At some point in my journey, I lost sight of that promise. I focused only on accumulating wealth and power, forgetting the original purpose." Manuel nodded, understanding. "It's easy to lose your way when success takes you too far from your roots. When you appeared with Jules's story," Richard concluded, "it was as if the universe was giving me a second chance, reminding me of that forgotten promise." The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the parking lot. It was time for goodbyes. The road knights needed to resume their journey, and Constance was eager to return home, where Anthony was preparing a special dinner to celebrate their first month back together as a family. Before leaving, Manuel took a small box from his motorcycle. "A gift for Jules," he explained, handing it to Constance. "You can give it to her when you get home." Constance thanked him, curious but respecting the mystery. Only later, when Jules opened the box at home, would they discover that it contained a small black vest, custom-made for the girl's size, with the Road Knight's emblem embroidered on the back, a flaming wheel and the words "Sour of Hope" below. That night, as the motorcyclists rode along Interstate 5 towards Seattle, Richard Mendonza worked in his penthouse office, no longer isolated in his ivory tower, but connected to the real world through the changes he had implemented and the lives he now positively touched. On his desk, 2 photographs side by side, one of his mother with him at 10 years old, holding the box of toy cars he had almost sold, another of Jules with her pink bicycle, taken at the recent company picnic. 2 stories separated by decades, connected by the same invisible thread of compassion and opportunity. The phone rang. It was Helen, asking if he would be much longer. The New Paths Foundation had officially launched that afternoon, and he had promised not to work late. "I'm finishing up," he replied. "Just a few more minutes." Richard looked out the window at the city sprawling below, dotted with lights. Somewhere out there, Constance, Anthony and Jules were having dinner together as a family after months of forced separation. Sebastian Oliver was probably proudly watching his daughter study for her college exams. Marianne Lopez had finally managed to move out of her sister's house and rent her own apartment. Gilbert Fry accompanied his wife to another chemotherapy session, with renewed hope from her improving condition. Small stories, ordinary lives, that could have been destroyed by corporate greed, but which were now flourishing again. And not just theirs, dozens of other families benefited by the reconstruction project, and hundreds more who would be helped by the expansion of the initiative through the foundation. All this because 4 men on motorcycles had decided to intervene. Because a 6-year-old girl had the courage to try to sell her bicycle to feed her mother. Because sometimes all we need is a mirror to remind us of who we truly are, or who we should be. Richard turned off the computer and put away his papers. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the 2 photographs on the table. Unbeknownst to him, he had completed a perfect circle, from a child helped to a helping adult, from someone in need to a provider, from someone who received compassion to someone capable of offering it. And perhaps, at some point in the future, Jules too would complete her own circle, transforming the experience of almost losing her bicycle into motivation to reach out to others. Perhaps she would become a true road knight, sowing hope wherever she went. The future was open, full of possibilities, like a road stretching beyond the horizon. And on that road the knights would continue their journey, finding other Jules, other Richards, other stories that needed intervention and redemption. Because kindness, as those 4 men in black vests well knew, can emerge from the most unexpected places. And all it takes is one gesture, a single act of courage to rekindle hope where there was only darkness. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Richard, Constance, and Jules has touched your heart and shown how small acts of courage can transform lives. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other stories that demonstrate the power of compassion and justice. Find it by clicking here on the side. If you were moved by the Road Knights and their mission to spread hope, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the beauty of solidarity and personal transformation. And you? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where a small gesture completely changed a difficult situation? Tell us in the comments and share your own story of hope. We look forward to hearing your experiences.